ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another webinar from Philips Lighting University. Today's webinar is titled See the Light and is presented by Svante Pettersson, who is Creative Director at the Philips Lighting Nordics.
So, it's a dark room, and it's up to us to create the light. Now, we can do that by just adding light from a point in the middle of the room, which some people prefer, or we can do it in a more variation way, which other people like. Or make it suit for any other activity or emotional reaction that you would like for the moment. No matter what, the room will speak to us in very different ways depending on how we change the lighting in that same physical room. My name is Svante Pettersson, and I am a lighting enthusiast and a creative director at Philips Lighting Nordic. In my everyday life, I am constantly thinking about reasons why people sometimes prefer different types of lighting and what's behind that. I have also spent huge part of my life working close to different designers, artists, and researchers that are deeply specialized in lighting in different ways. And I must say that I'm so thankful to all of those guys that have shared their knowledge with me. And because of that, I had to write my own book about what I've learned, but also about my personal lighting philosophy. The name of the book is the same as today's presentation, See the Light. And I know the name sounds a little bit cliche, but I still believe that this is what it's all about, to really try to understand what you see and what visual experience it's built by, and what type of emotional reaction this causes, and to you as a person with your own history and preferences. I think that if you want to do better lighting for yourself at home, you need to understand your own vision. And if you, as a public lighting professional, gonna do better lighting for other people, you still have to start with yourself in order to understand other people's opinions, wishes, and reactions. So today's show will very much be based on my book, but I have to emphasize that just because I have written a book about lighting doesn't mean that I know the best about it. That's actually my conclusion after doing it. We are all individuals with different feelings and opinions, and that's also what this book is all about. But this is one way of seeing it, and during this hour, we will only be able to scratch a little bit on the top of the iceberg. So this will be a little bit like a introduction to the whole thing. Before you can get to know your own vision and your visual sense, I think that you have to understand a bit about your visual background. I have lived most of my life in so-called multicultural areas, and I find it quite interesting looking into other people's windows in the evening. I know that you are not supposed to do that, I know. But still, I can't help myself. And still, I find it very interesting to guess what people who's living there and from what part of the world they're coming from. I think the light says a lot about that. If I look at my own visual background, as a native Nordic guy, I'm raised in a light from a low standing sun, huge part of the year, if we get any light at all. And when that sunbeam travels through the stratosphere, that low angle gets very visually warm and tells us about the surface, structure, and color in a very special way. Later comes the blue hour that actually can stay all night long for some parts of the year. And in contrast to that, we're often trying to create our warm and caring light for ourselves. Sometimes with a classic Nordic snowball chandelier. The pure light from a single candle inside is actually wrapping itself around each and every snowball in a kind of magic way, in my opinion. Now, during that Nordic dawn, I find it very hard to come up with good lighting at home. It's like it's still too bright to switch on the lighting, but at the same time, the light level is often too low for me. But when I finally turn on the lighting, it's very often I try to find a sound character that is quite close to what the daylight just offered me in the earlier moment. All in order to not give myself sort of a character contrast shock. So we have the daylight at dawn and the light that I create myself. As I earlier said, I think that the key to be able to make better lighting is to understand what you see, how your sight sense respond to that, and how you react to that as a person. In order to do that, I think it's important to understand different visual components that your visual experience is built by. Therefore, I'm going to start with having a quick look at these three basic components that together gives us the experience of a room. It's visuality, spatiality, and atmosphere. Let's have a quick look at them. Start with visuality. I would say that visuality is about how well we can see details in a room. Very often we think that a high level and even light distribution is the best way. But very often it turns out that we need variation and even some darkness in order to understand what you see. And in this case, it's some kind of a sculpture, spatiality. Depending on how we light up our room, we will perceive its physical boundaries in different ways. For example, large and airy, or even small and craned. In this case, I think that we have a typical room in a room situation. The light will also make the same physical architecture in interior speak to you in different emotional ways. This is very much up to you as a person, but the feeling can be, for example, monotone, boring, or maybe welcoming in a fresh, interesting way. So, the visual factors. What will happen now is that we will go further and break down our visual experience into smaller pieces. That can be done in many different ways, but I personally prefer to do it in a way that my two lighting professors, Anders Liljefors and John A. Hed, did when I studied light back in 2000. It's about this. Here they are. Light level, light distribution, shadows, transparency, reflection, glare, light color, and surface color. The visual factors that together builds up everything we see. By analyzing each and every one of them, you can slowly start to understand how the room you are building are coming to reality. And maybe you get a better understanding in creating them yourself. But you will also understand the rooms you don't like and maybe how to avoid them. So let's start. We start with light level. What is darkness and what is brightness? And where goes the line in between? Is there a line in between? One level of light, from example the moon, can be non-existent in the daytime, even if it's still there, but very bright, tough, and aggressive in the nighttime, although the physical light level is still the same. One level of light can be perceived as totally okay in one situation, but in another situation, it can be perceived as too low. And compared to a third level of light, it can be totally okay again. So the level of light is very often perceived in relation to another level of light. As you know, changing the light level can be about just dimming the light. But the perceived light level is also related to color of the surfaces in the room. A white table brings this level, but what will happen in this situation when we use a gray table? Have a look. Actually this. It steals a lot of the light level. So we have a gray table, and we switch back to a white table, and we go to a gray table again. Light distribution. How do you want to distribute your light? And what do you want to show? Is there something that you would like to enhance? Or maybe you would like to hide something? In the outdoor room, the sun and the weather causes all kinds of light distribution during one day. It can be diffuse, like in this situation. Can be very sharp from a high angle in front of you. Or low-angled, stroking the landscape from the side and finally accentuating selected vertical areas. This is a very topical Nordic situation here. Pretty much the same will happen to your room depending on how you select your light distribution. Diffuse light will make the room speak to you in one way, and variation will cause another feeling. And this is actually just using a more narrow light. So we have the diffuse light and the more directed narrow light. Depending on how a lamp is built, it will distribute the light in many different ways. And it will also tell you about the room in different ways. I have to say, do not pick a lamp just because of its shape and design. Try to understand its light distribution and what that will do to the room. A light beam high up on the wall will create a certain feeling, and a beam lower in the room will create another. Check out the beam on the wall and the lower beam. But also the beam angle is very, very relevant for the feeling. We have a rather narrow beam here right now. Let's switch it to a diffuse beam. There. Diffuse. Narrow. Diffuse. Narrow. As well as the light tells us about the world, shadows also does. There are even lighting designers today that call themselves shadow makers, and that's quite interesting, and I kind of like that. This is a typical Nordic situation in which the low sun is passing through the window and through the furniture in the room, and finally creates a shadow on the wall in the end of the room. And you can also call that a sort of a projection if you want to. Shadows comes in very different ways, in different shapes, and they can offer sharp edges, but also soft gradients. But most of all, I think it is the small shadows that actually gives us the opportunity to understand the different materials. Depending on how the light strokes a material, the shadows will behave in different ways. And you can, in a way, say that the world is built by small shadows. So we have a very low angle stroking here of the material, and back to a more diffuse light. A luminaire with a diffuse light source, will create shadows in a rather soft way, as this one does. But if you change that lamp into a clear one, I'm talking about the light source here, it will immediately create shadows in a more sharp way. So let's go back. A diffuse light source and a clear light source. Diffuse light source and a clear light source that creates more sharp shadows. Oh, that's the sculpture again. Well, it can be hard to understand its design when we're not having any shadows at all in this diffuse light. And once again, add some shadows and it gets easier. Back to diffuse again. Now, I will arrange the light and I will lit the sculpture from different angles with red, green, and blue light beam. And have a look what's happening. All of a sudden, these funky types of shadows will appear. And this cool effect is also something that we see more and more popping up at different lighting events and so on. So that's a strong trend, I would say, right now. And it's kind of fun. Back in the days, this was like something that just happened when you didn't think about it. But today we are more and more doing it, and we are aware of it. And it's kind of a cool effect. I think you recognize this type of natural reflection. Very calm water. But what will happen if we throw a stone in it? This water will start to appear in many different ways. The surface will behave in this way, move further to that way, and we'll stretch it out to all kinds of reflections. And those kinds of reflections is actually also reflections that our room is offering us. If you're looking around you, you can find different types of reflections in the room, very often in the small details. And what we see in this picture is a kind of a typical reflections when you have a rather glossy table. But look what will happen if we change that tabletop into a matte top. We can get rid of that reflection if we are having problems with it. So a glossy top, a matte tabletop, and a glossy top. Let's check this material a little closer here. Now we are looking at the tabletop very close, from a very close distance, and we can see that reflection. Once again, we switch the glossy material into a matte material, and all of a sudden, we have this. Back to the glossy, and switch it to the matte tabletop. If we change the color on the tabletop, for example into black, we will have like this feeling. And now we have to be aware that if we make this surface glossy, things will happen. So let's make it glossy. Now we have a very strong reflection that is very much caused by the contrast between its dark background. And this is something that we always need to have in mind when we are creating our rooms. Oh, the disco ball effect. Of course, there are positive versions of reflection, especially the different sparkling results that we see here direct from the ball. Love them, and also the different projections that we see in the room. This is really something that you can use in order to create nice designs. And now, a piece of art on the wall with colors. And I think it's lit in a quite nice way. I like that way of accentuating paintings. Personally, I get a good feeling of this installation, but look what happens when we place a glass in front of this painting, which, by the way, is quite common. Let's place the glass. And bam. All of a sudden, the magic feeling is gone, for me. And let's take it away and go back to the magic feeling. We have the magic feeling, and we put a glass in front of it. And it's very disturbing. But this is very much in my point of view. So I'm saying a lot of things here. But however, it's up to you guys to judge. I mean, you have to create your own opinion about this. So I'm talking a lot, but you have to judge. You have your own opinion, and you can feel what you feel as a human being and an individual. And this very much leads us over to the most important one of the different factors as I see it, and it's glare. As I said, I see this as the most important factor, and it's something that we usually should avoid in every way we can. Have you ever been thinking about how much uncontrolled glare lighting we are installing in this world? Lighting that actually is working against our vision when it should help it. Isn't that waste of energy? Okay, there are kind of nice versions of glare. This is the first Nordic sun in Mars after a long dark winter. All the Nordic people are standing against walls and just looking up at the window. I remember when I was a little boy, I looked at my parents and I thought they looked stupid. But I do that myself these days. But still, we get a headache from it. That first time, that gives us very often a headache. And that's very much what's happening in our rooms as well when we are not controlling the light in a good way. Okay, this is kind of extreme, but it's not that seldom we see these kind of installations. Like this, for example. This is often caused by like spotlights sitting in the middle of the room and constantly destroying every human sight sense that gets close to it. And maybe this is a better solution. Spotlights that are placed above its target, which I think is better, but still they cause glare in my point of view. I think that those spotlights are stealing my attention and are very disturbing, and I'm not interested in seeing them at all. So look what happens when I add glare sheets to them. Hang on now. Look at this. Did you see that? In my point of view, it's very relaxing. And it gives me more of a magic feeling. And this is how I perceive it as a person. Other people can feel different, but for me, this is relaxing and magic. And it's a little bit about like breathing out, like shoo. And when we go back to that uncontrolled light again, it's more like bah. And look at this. Shoo. Let's breathe out. Everybody breathe out. Shoo. And go back. Bah. And shoo. That's glare for me. I'm really sharing my deepest thoughts here with you guys. Thank you for being with me. Now, glare is not always about having spotlights in your face. It's also about luminaires that are very intensive in contrast to their background. This situation is quite okay. I think it is. But what will happen if we change the white walls into gray walls? And I would choose a gray color which is 50%. That means that it's in the middle between white and black. So let's do that. Gray walls. This actually happens. My vision is now having huge problems handling the high contrast between the bright luminar and the dark background. And let's have a look at it again. White walls, gray walls, white walls, and gray walls. And of course, this is how the camera reacted in that situation. But still, the camera's reaction tells us a lot. And I was there, and this was exactly what I felt in that situation. Transparency. A material can be designed in different ways, and quite often you have the possibility to see through it in one way or another. These icicles offer us different types of transparency. If you're studying them, you can see everything from clear optics to frosted and diffuse parts. The icicles are always also placed together in a way that we have a front side and a back side. So you can also see through them as they was a type of a fence. And that's also a version of transparency in my personal point of view. Depending on if a transparent material is lit or not, it will affect the possibility to see through it. Here we have some light on in the room, and we are just looking at a plain curtain. But if we shut off the light, you will all of a sudden see that there's actually a world beyond this fabric material. In this situation, we have a plain Nordic winter day out there. The low sun is shining straight through a clear window, and a certain area of the room gets highly accentuated. By adding frosted material in that same glass, the room will change its character, and the window becomes quite bright and intensive. Kind of primary in this situation, actually. Now let's check out some different types of glasses that are often used in different designs. Right now you see a LED light source through a clear glass. Now I will add a frosted glass on that and see how it behaves. Prismatic glass, horizontal ridged glass, vertical ridged glass, and the opal glass that makes everything very diffuse. When I'm saying light color, I mean the actual color of the light that, for example, can be found in many different ways in nature. And when we are making artificial light sources, we are often trying to simulate different light colors that daylight offers us, both the warm and the cold light. Let's repeat, the warm and the cold light. And as I see it, we often perceive one certain light color in relation to another light color. In this case, the light color can be, let's say, neutral warm. Let's say that. But in relation to another light color, the same light color can all of a sudden get kind of cold. And then compared to a third light color, it's quite warm again. So a specific light color is often perceived in relation to another light color. Now, some says that cold light often is bad and unfriendly, and I also think so in many cases. But I would like to say that it also depends on the light distribution. Now, even a warm light can be unfriendly if we're not thinking about light distribution. And it can also, even if it's warm, it can give us kind of a cold atmosphere anyway. So once again, this is cold light and this is warm light. Cold light and warm light. But there's a huge difference in it. And it's not automatically like we prefer one in front of another. Oh, a green room. These days it's very common to use strong light colors in different environments, and I must say that green is not very often used. It's very seldom I see that. And blue is quite common. It's very often used in when you want to create depth and space in the room, and add some red to the blue, and the result will be magenta, or if you prefer to say purple. And some people get kind of a luxury feeling from this combination. I think I do, actually. But personally, I like red. Yeah. I know that many people think that red is a bad light color. But however, just adding a single color in a room can actually be quite boring. And after a while, your sight sense can lose the grip of the color because it has nothing to relate to. But if you just add a small neutral light over a small single spot, that same room will change. And the room and the colors will speak to you in a whole different ways. So back to purple, the blue, and even the green gets more okay in my point of view. Maybe the green is the next black. Let's go for green, everybody. So, surface color. We have been talking about light color, and now we will step over to surface color. And we will start with having a look at the relation between these two factors. Different types of light colors enhances the different types of surface colors in very different ways. Very often the cold light makes the blue colors clear, and the warmer light makes the red colors pops out. We go back again, back to the cold, and step forward to the warm. However, that is often the rule, but there are exceptions with some of the latest LEDs. So other things can happen, but still it's very common that the colors react in this way. But what will happen if we use very strong light colors? For example, blue. As you can see, the red and the yellow surface colors are now more or less blacked out. We go back to the white one. There we have the white warm light, and switch to the blue. And there we are blacking out red and yellow. Adding some green light to this, we will get more of a cyan feeling. And you can see that the yellow and the green surface is fighting their way back a little bit here. We go back to the blue and add some green again. And what happens when we keep the blue, but we switch the green to red instead? We get this result. And have a look if we switch it all to red. All of a sudden, we are blocking everything that is blue. It will be non-existing and black. And let's try the green. And back again to the white. So different types of light colors enhances different types of surface colors. Finally, what we seldom think about is that the surface color is actually very often getting a grip of the room where you have it. Here you see a white painting on the wall. It's lit with a very white light, I would say. And we will keep that white light. But what we will do is that we will change the surface color of that painting. We switch it to yellow. And remember, we're still having that same white light beam on the painting, but we are changing the surface color of the painting. And you can see how that color is actually giving or taking the room in a very hard grip. And the same thing will happen if you change the color surface to red, green, or blue. We go back to green, red, yellow, and we step forward to white again. So, ladies and gentlemen, here we are again. We have just gone through a short introduction to the visual factors that together builds up everything we see. And by analyzing each and every one of them, you can slowly start to understand how the rooms you like are built. And maybe you can get a better understanding in creating them yourself. All in order to get a better understanding of the relation between visuality, spatiality, and atmosphere. And to get a better understanding of your own lighting culture. And most of all, this is what it's all about. Get to know your visual sense. And I think that you will find a new world, actually. This is quite interesting. It's not the only way, but this is one way of doing it.